Picking up the elderly woman by the roadside, Jeffrey drove her home. But when she started humming a song, he froze, remembering how his mother, who had disappeared 43 years ago, used to sing that very same tune. That evening, when darkness had already settled in, Jeffrey Smith, a well-known entrepreneur from Atlanta who owned a chain of grocery stores, was driving home after an exhausting day. He had chosen to drive himself, enjoying the rare silence and nearly empty road, leaving behind the noise and hustle of the city. The night air was fresh, and Jeffrey, lost in his thoughts, was absent-mindedly guiding the car down the road leading out of town. However, his journey and thoughts took an unexpected turn when he noticed a lone figure on the side of the road. Despite the darkness, the headlights of his car illuminated an elderly woman struggling against the night wind. Concerned for her safety, Jeffrey instinctively pulled over. He wondered what could have compelled someone her age to be wandering alone at such a late hour. Stepping out of his luxurious car, he cautiously approached her. Wrapped in an old shawl, she continued walking steadily, her gray hair blowing in the wind, and her eyes reflecting a mixture of determination and melancholy. "Excuse me, ma'am," Jeffrey began in a soft, respectful voice. "Are you all right? Do you need help getting somewhere?" His tone revealed the heart of a man who, despite his success and wealth, had not lost his sense of compassion. The old woman lifted her tired and slightly confused gaze to him. She shrugged slightly and answered in a quiet voice, "I got lost. I didn't realize how far I had walked, and now I don't know how to get back." Jeffrey nodded, glancing at the dark road. "It's dangerous to walk here at night. Please, let me drive you home. I'd feel better knowing you're safe." The elderly woman looked at him warily and shook her head. "No need. I don't know you, young man. I'll find my way back on my own." Jeffrey sighed but didn't back down. "I understand that this might seem strange, but I really can't leave you here. There are stray dogs around, and besides, it's dark, and hardly anyone drives this road at night." She hesitated, avoiding his gaze. Seeing this, Jeffrey continued gently, "Do you have someone I could call? Family? Friends? I can make the call for you and let them know where you are, if that would make you more comfortable." She sighed softly, and his words seemed to touch something deep inside her. With a sorrowful voice, she whispered, "No, I have no one. No one to call. I live alone. Maybe Grace, but I don't even have my phone with me." Her words struck Jeffrey right in the heart. He felt an overwhelming need to help this woman, now knowing how alone she was. "Then please," he said carefully, "allow me to drive you. I just want to make sure you're safe." After hesitating a little longer, she finally nodded and got into the car, carefully folding her hands on her lap and nervously looking around. Sensing her unease, Jeffrey drove cautiously, trying not to make her feel uncomfortable. After a short silence, he spoke, hoping to ease the tension. "My name is Jeffrey. What's your name?" She glanced at him with a faint smile. "My name is Agnes Carson." "Agnes Carson. What a beautiful name. I haven't met someone with that name in a long time," Jeffrey said, smiling, feeling the tension slowly fade. "Do you often walk around here? Though I must say, it's not the best place for an evening stroll." Agnes responded, looking slightly embarrassed. "No, not often. Sometimes I just want to step outside and breathe in the fresh air. But this time I walked too far. I have memory problems." "What did you say your name was again, son?" "Jeffrey," he repeated in a calm voice, feeling a wave of sympathy for the old woman. Silence fell between them again, but this time it felt more peaceful. Wanting to keep the conversation going, Jeffrey gently asked, "Agnes Carson, do you live nearby? Does someone usually accompany you on your walks?" For a moment, Agnes seemed lost in thought, as if drifting through old memories. Then she slowly answered, "I used to walk with my friend. We always went out together in the evenings, and back then, my memory was still good." She sighed, staring into the distance, as if seeing something invisible before her. "It's always easier with a friend," Jeffrey said softly. "If you don't mind me asking, what happened with your memory?" Agnes looked a bit hesitant, but noticing the genuine interest and concern in his eyes, decided to answer. "It started a few years ago. I don't even know why. At first, I just forgot small things, where I put my glasses or a book. Then I started getting confused, forgetting why I left the house or how to get back. She shook her head and added with a sad smile, "My friend always supported me. She would say, 'Don't worry, Agnes, I'm here. I won't let you get lost.' We were like two parts of a whole, always together." Jeffrey noticed how her voice trembled with memories and cautiously asked, "And where is your friend now?" The old woman averted her gaze for a moment, her eyes becoming slightly moist. "She left almost a year ago," she said softly. "Now you see, I walk alone. I've gotten used to it, I suppose, but sometimes it feels so scary and lonely." Jeffrey felt his heart clench with sympathy. "I'm very sorry," he said quietly. "Dealing with this alone must be incredibly difficult." Agnes nodded, offering a grateful smile. "Yes, being alone is hard," she admitted, "but sometimes it feels like she's still nearby, like I can hear her voice or see her in a crowd." She fell silent, lost in thought once more. Respecting her feelings, Jeffrey didn't rush her for a response. He simply kept driving, listening to every word as if it were a story he needed to hear. After a minute, Agnes added as if trying to explain herself, "I thought I was going for a short walk today, but somehow I got lost again. I don't even understand how it happens. Sometimes it feels like with every walk, I lose a little piece of myself." Deeply moved by her words, Jeffrey reassured her, "You're not lost now. I'm here, and I won't let you be lost again. We'll get you home safely." Agnes looked at him with gratitude. "Thank you, Jeffrey. Your kindness is like a light in the darkness for me," she whispered before falling silent again. The silence in the car was no longer heavy. Instead, it was warm and comforting, filled with unspoken understanding. Jeffrey felt that meeting this woman was no coincidence, that her story was somehow intertwined with his own life. Suddenly, Agnes Carson began humming softly, so quietly that at first Jeffrey barely noticed. She was singing "Eternal Love" with such deep emotion that he froze, captivated by the melody filling the car. "We will always be together, as long as my eyes close, as long as my heart beats." Her voice grew stronger, filled with an unusual power. Jeffrey couldn't take his eyes off her. He felt as if the song was awakening something deep within him, something long forgotten, something deeply personal. "That voice, it sounds so familiar," he murmured, almost whispering, his own voice betraying a slight tremble. Agnes looked at him with a gentle smile. "This song is for those who have truly loved. Each of us carries something eternal in our hearts," she said softly, as if sharing a long-kept secret. "This song touches the soul of those who have experienced real love. We've all known eternal love at some point." Jeffrey couldn't shake the feeling that she was familiar, though he couldn't recall from where. He continued asking careful questions, hoping to learn more about his mysterious passenger, but she responded briefly or remained silent, lost in her thoughts. The cold, dark night deepened the silence surrounding them on the empty road, with only the car's headlights illuminating the path ahead. Despite his attempts to continue the conversation and fill the quiet, the woman remained immersed in her thoughts, occasionally offering him a small, appreciative smile or a short reply, which only intrigued him more. Each passing minute of silence made Jeffrey feel even more compelled to understand who she was. He stole glances at her face in the rearview mirror, almost convinced he had seen her before. But where and when? As they drove, Jeffrey kept trying to engage his elderly companion in conversation, throwing out polite questions, hoping to get a hint about her identity or history. Then suddenly, their peaceful ride was interrupted by a loud bang and an unexpected loss of control. Jeffrey felt the car veer dangerously as the tires screeched against the asphalt. He gripped the wheel tightly, his pulse quickening, as he fought to regain control. The silence of the night was shattered by the screech of brakes and the piercing sound of tires skidding. Within seconds, the situation spiraled into chaos, plunging both Jeffrey and his passenger into a moment of danger. The car zigzagged down the road as Jeffrey, with cold calculation and quick reflexes, struggled to prevent a disaster. Finally, after a tense battle with the steering wheel, he managed to bring the car to a stop. Exhaling heavily, trying to calm himself, he stepped out to inspect the damage. Walking around to the right rear tire, he found a clear puncture. With the determination of a man unshaken by adversity, he retrieved the necessary tools from the trunk and began changing the tire, moving with careful precision. Once the replacement was complete and he ensured everything was secure, Jeffrey returned to the car, ready to continue their nighttime journey. But as he glanced in the rearview mirror, he was met with a shocking realization. His mysterious passenger had vanished. Stunned, Jeffrey quickly exited the car and scanned the surroundings. The empty road stretched out before him, bathed in pale moonlight, with no sign of the elderly woman anywhere in sight. He assumed she might have stepped out of the car while he was busy changing the tire, but that seemed unlikely given her age and the speed at which everything had happened. Jeffrey searched the road and the shoulders, illuminating them with his phone's flashlight, but he found no trace of her. The silence of the night only deepened his confusion and unease. It was as if the woman had simply vanished into the mist. After fruitless searching and growing concern, Jeffrey returned to the car. Logic and exhaustion told him to continue his journey home, though deep inside, curiosity and worry gnawed at him over the old woman's strange disappearance. The road stretched before him, lonely and quiet, leading him back to the safety of home. But his thoughts were anything but calm. The memory of meeting the woman and her sudden disappearance wouldn't leave his mind. Upon arriving at his country house, Jeffrey felt an overwhelming urge to tell his wife about the strange incident. She listened attentively, but there was a skeptical glint in her eyes. She suggested that perhaps the old woman was some kind of ghost or spirit that had crossed his path. "That sounds very mysterious," she said with interest and a slight smile. "It happened exactly as I told you," Jeffrey insisted. "She was there when the tire blew out. While I was changing it, she vanished without a trace, even though I searched everywhere." His wife, with a mix of humor and seriousness, suggested, "Maybe it was a spirit deciding to pay you a visit. You know, there are legends about ghosts in these parts." Jeffrey, irritated by her playful attitude, replied, "Don't be ridiculous, dear. Ghosts don't exist. She was just an elderly woman who needed help." "Well then," his wife teased, "next time you meet a ghost on the road, don't expect me to believe you." Despite his skepticism about the supernatural, Jeffrey couldn't shake the lingering unease about what had happened. Finally, deciding to play along with his wife's joke, he said, "All right, dear, next time I'll be careful with wandering spirits." They ended the conversation with laughter and warm embraces. "It's been a long day. Let's get some rest," she suggested gently. "Yes, let's," Jeffrey agreed, holding her close and finding comfort in the warmth of their home after such a mysterious night. Though he was troubled by his wife's disbelief in his story, he chose not to press the discussion. Instead, he distracted himself by telling her about his busy workday and their plans for the upcoming weekend. However, deep down, a sense of unease lingered, and thoughts of the old woman refused to leave his mind. Who was she? Why did she seem so familiar? And why was there so much mystery surrounding this event? He pondered these questions before drifting off to sleep. The next morning, after all the strange events of the previous night, Jeffrey went about his usual routine, enjoying breakfast with his wife while discussing everyday matters and the latest news. After kissing her goodbye, he headed to his car to drive to work. But as he opened the car door, he noticed something unusual. Lying on the passenger seat was an old wool blanket. "What is this?" he exclaimed, staring at the unexpected find in disbelief. Something about the blanket looked familiar, as if someone had deliberately left it there. But who and why? A sudden flash of memory from the previous night flickered through his mind, the mysterious old woman who had vanished so abruptly. Now he was certain the blanket belonged to her. Folding the blanket carefully, Jeffrey took it with him, heading to the office. But his thoughts were consumed by its origin. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that the blanket was somehow connected to that woman. A wave of curiosity and confusion washed over him, and he made a firm decision to return to the same stretch of road that night and try to learn more about the mysterious old woman. "I won't rest until I find her again," he told himself, determined to uncover the truth and return the blanket. That evening, he set off on the same road, gripping the blanket tightly on the passenger seat. He wasn't just looking to return it, he needed to understand how she had disappeared so quickly. Inside him, fear and tension wrestled with the hope that this strange encounter might help him uncover something important from his own past. Jeffrey carefully drove along the road, scanning every corner and turn for any sign of the woman. The night cloaked everything in thick darkness, surrounding him with an eerie silence. But his determination shone through the fear like a guiding light. He was set on finding her and unraveling this mystery. After a long drive through the dark, his eyes finally caught sight of a lone figure in the distance, eerily similar to the one he had seen the night before. The closer he got, the clearer the silhouette became. There was no doubt. It was her. Jeffrey stopped the car and stepped out, feeling a slight unease. "Agnes Carson," he called out cautiously. The old woman lifted her gaze, furrowing her brows in confusion. There was no recognition in her eyes, as if she were seeing him for the first time. Who are you?" she asked, stepping back slightly, clearly not remembering Jeffrey. He felt something break inside him as he realized she was lost again and might have forgotten their encounter from the previous night. "It's me, Jeffrey," he said gently, trying to sound as friendly as possible. "I drove you home yesterday when you got lost. Do you remember?" Agnes Carson hesitated for a moment, then slowly shook her head. Her face still showed only bewilderment. "I'm sorry, young man, but I don't recall," she said softly. Jeffrey smiled carefully, not wanting to upset her. "That's okay. Maybe you got lost again. Let me take you home." The old woman seemed unsure whether she could trust this stranger, but something in his eyes reassured her, and she nodded, accepting his help. Jeffrey extended his hand, assisting her into the car. For a brief moment, he held the wool blanket in his hands and asked, "If this is your blanket, please tell me, where did you get it? It looks so familiar, but I can't seem to remember where I've seen it before." The old woman, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. Her words were calm but tinged with a gentle sadness. "When you were little, your mother used to wrap you in a similar blanket, made from the same soft, warm wool." Her voice trembled as she spoke, as if she were reaching back into the distant past. Jeffrey was stunned. His face reflected a mix of shock and pain as childhood memories began to surface in his mind. These simple words from the old woman built an invisible bridge between his present and his past, unlocking forgotten corners of his soul and buried recollections. As they drove down the dark road, which now felt like a path leading to the answers of his own past, Jeffrey's thoughts raced with questions. "How do you know such personal things about me and my mother?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't remember my mother. I was told she disappeared. That was 43 years ago. How could you possibly know anything about her?" His voice carried both wonder and desperation, his eyes filled with questions he desperately needed answered. The old woman fell silent again, as if she were lost in the depths of her own thoughts, leaving Jeffrey alone with his emotions and racing mind. A storm of feelings swirled inside him as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Could this blanket truly be a link to his past? How could a stranger know such intimate details of his childhood? They drove on through the quiet night, Jeffrey's eyes fixed on the road, but his mind consumed by the mystery surrounding this woman and the secrets she might hold. He made a silent vow to himself. He would uncover everything hidden behind this strange coincidence. The mystery was far deeper than he had ever imagined. As their journey neared its end, a sudden realization struck Jeffrey. "I remember now," he said suddenly. "You're the woman who sells vegetables near my office." The old woman let out a soft sigh, a mixture of sadness and resignation, and nodded. Jeffrey had often seen her outside his office, selling fresh produce. In the evenings, she would return to her modest home on the outskirts of town, relying on the kindness of strangers who occasionally offered her a ride. Now he understood why her face had seemed so familiar. But one mystery remained. "I don't understand. Why did you say that my mother wrapped me in a blanket like this? Does that mean you knew her?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and growing anxiety. The old woman, seeing the turmoil in Jeffrey's eyes, began telling childhood stories with such accuracy that he could hardly believe his ears. With each of her words, vivid images of his past came to life, as if she were flipping through the pages of an old album, revealing memories long forgotten. The air inside the car became thick with tension, almost tangible, as if the space between them was filling with the weight of the truth she was about to reveal. Jeffrey felt himself being pulled deeper into his own past, overwhelmed by her knowledge of his life. "Right here, at the intersection. Please stop the car," the old woman said softly, pointing to a small house in the distance, dimly lit by a single light at the entrance. Jeffrey struggled to contain the wave of curiosity and unexpected fear washing over him as he pulled up in front of the house. He felt as if he was on the verge of uncovering something profound and braced himself to hear the continuation of the story that bound him to this woman. As the old woman gathered herself to step out, she hesitated. Then suddenly she began humming the same melody she had sung the night before. A quiet, piercing melody spread through the night, as if the very air vibrated with memories. Jeffrey couldn't tear his eyes away, mesmerized by the song, filled with such sorrow and warmth that it went straight to his heart. Time seemed to stop, and for a moment he was lost, submerged in this forgotten world. "Let our love live forever, so your eyes never close to me, so we can always share this eternal love that binds us," she sang, her voice growing deeper with every word, filled with a profound, almost tangible sadness and tenderness. Jeffrey listened in astonishment. "Wait a minute," he said. "I'll turn off the engine." He wanted to turn off the engine to ask the old woman more questions. There were far more questions than answers. He got out of the car, switched off the ignition, and when he returned to his seat, she was gone. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, dissolving with the echo of her song. In the blink of an eye, she disappeared from view, and the night wind scattered her silhouette like smoke. Jeffrey frantically looked around, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. Confusion and fear flooded his mind. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Maybe my wife was right. Maybe she really was a ghost. I seriously need to get some sleep. This job is driving me crazy, he muttered to himself, his voice barely breaking through the fear that had settled deep in his heart. He got back into the car, searching desperately for any sign that could prove she had really been there. But there was nothing, nothing that could confirm her presence. Then, as if struck by lightning, a memory surfaced. Her voice, the melody she had sung to him as a child. "That's the same song my mother used to sing to me before bed when I was a little boy," he whispered aloud, his voice tinged with both wonder and aching nostalgia. A chilling shiver ran down his spine as he realized the connection. The melody his mother had once used to lull him to sleep was now being sung to him, years later, by this mysterious woman. He felt both overwhelmed and exhilarated, his soul filling with a newfound determination to uncover who she was and how she knew such personal details about his life. Could she really be my missing mother? That night, Jeffrey returned home with a fierce resolve to unravel the mystery surrounding this woman. His thoughts were consumed by her, and he made a promise to himself to get to the bottom of this strange coincidence, no matter what it took, even if it meant facing the deepest secrets of his past. The next day, Jeffrey woke up with an unshakable feeling that he had to find the old woman. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Maybe she really knew something important about his past. Maybe she was his mother. This thought gnawed at his mind, creating more and more questions that refused to let him rest. All day, Jeffrey roamed the city, returning to the place where he had first met her, then driving back to where they had parted ways. No sign of her. He even stopped by his office and checked the spot where she usually sold fruits and vegetables, but she wasn't there either. Her disappearance left a void in his soul, and day after day he came home feeling an increasing sense of despair. On the fifth evening, his wife noticed that something was off. During dinner, she finally spoke up. "Jeffrey, you've been acting different lately. Did something happen?" she asked with concern, watching the distant look in his eyes. Jeffrey hesitated for a moment, but decided to share his thoughts. "Do you remember the old woman I told you about? The one I met on the road?" "Of course," his wife smirked. "The ghostly old lady. You said she was lost and that you gave her a ride. But what's bothering you so much?" Her voice was soft, supportive. Jeffrey sighed. Her teasing made him reluctant to continue, but he pressed on. "I can't stop thinking that she might be connected to me. I feel like there's something between us, like I have to find her and uncover the truth." His wife frowned slightly, though a skeptical smile flickered across her lips. The idea that Jeffrey genuinely believed a random old woman on the road could be his mother seemed absurd. She looked at him doubtfully and asked quietly, "Do you really think she could be your mother?" Jeffrey took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts, and answered, "You don't understand. This wasn't just a random encounter. That night she started singing in the car, and it was the exact same song my mother used to sing to me when I was a child. Eternal Love. It was her voice, her intonations. Everything was just as I remember." His wife's expression softened. She still didn't entirely grasp his obsession, but her skepticism began to waver. "But maybe it's just a coincidence," she suggested. "A lot of people know that song." "If only it were just the song," Jeffrey continued, unable to hide his excitement. "But she also left an old blanket in my car. It looked painfully familiar, like I had seen it in my childhood. When I asked her about it, she said my mother used to wrap me in one just like it when I was little. How could she know that?" Hearing his explanation, his wife fell into deep thought. The doubt in her eyes faded slightly as she began to consider the impossible. "But if she really knew your mother, why didn't you ask her directly then? Why didn't she tell you right away?" Jeffrey shook his head, recalling that night. She avoided direct answers. It was as if she was afraid or unable to say anything. "I don't understand why, but every day that passed without seeing her, I felt more and more that I had to know the truth. This feeling won't let me rest." His wife looked at him carefully, her face softening. "All right, if this really matters to you, keep looking. But please be careful. What if this is just an old story and you're getting too caught up in it?" Jeffrey nodded, though deep down, he knew he didn't need any more confirmation. He knew that meeting this woman was no coincidence. He was ready to keep searching for her, despite all the doubts. 6 days passed. Every evening he drove down the same road, almost losing hope. But finally, when he had nearly abandoned his expectations, he saw a familiar figure standing on the roadside in the distance. The old woman stood there as if she had been waiting for him. Jeffrey's heart pounded wildly. He stopped the car, jumped out, and quickly approached her, feeling a mix of joy and nervous anticipation. "Agnes Carson," he called out to her, looking at her hopefully. "Good evening," he began calmly. "I can't stop thinking about our past encounters. Please tell me the truth. Who are you, and how are you connected to my mother?" The old woman remained silent for a long time, then let out a heavy sigh. Gazing into the distance, as if lost in memories, she finally spoke. "Many years ago, I worked in your mother's house. It was a different time back then, and life was hard for a woman on her own." She sighed again, her voice trembling as if she was holding back tears. "When I became pregnant, I was left without support. Your mother offered me a solution that seemed like salvation at the time. She said she could give my son what I never could." Jeffrey listened, feeling a growing mixture of shock and unease. The woman's words were filled with pain, and her story was pulling him deeper into a part of his life he had never known. "She told me she could give him a better chance than I ever could, that she could give him a future I wasn't capable of providing. And I agreed. At the time, I thought I was doing the best thing for him." Her voice shook and tears glistened on her wrinkled face. "But after 3 years, she mysteriously disappeared, and you were taken in by her husband, the man you know as your father. It was hard for me to accept that you would grow up without a mother, but I couldn't come back. Your father gave you so much. He did well." Jeffrey barely found the strength to speak, struggling against the flood of emotions. "Are you saying that I'm your son? And my father? He's not really my biological father." Jeffrey was speechless. He hadn't been prepared for a revelation like this. The old woman slowly nodded, barely holding back her emotions. The pain in her eyes was one she had carried her entire life. "Yes, Jeffrey, you are my son." The words hit him like a thunderclap, and in an instant, his entire world was turned upside down. He was overwhelmed with shock. He didn't know what to say or how to react. His whole life suddenly felt like something different, and memories of his childhood and family flashed before his eyes, now viewed in an entirely new light. He looked at the woman standing before him. someone who was both a stranger and, at the same time, someone closer than anyone else. And he realized how many years she had spent watching over him from afar, secretly caring and suffering. Jeffrey's heart filled with a storm of emotions, pain, joy, compassion, and disbelief. He couldn't believe what was happening. Everything he thought he knew about his childhood and family had crumbled, leaving room for a new reality. Jeffrey felt the ground slipping from under him. The old woman, watching his face, continued in a quiet voice. When I realized I couldn't be part of your life, I decided that I would at least watch over you from a distance. First, I worked as a janitor at the school you attended. Then I moved to your college. Later, I started selling vegetables and fruits near your office. Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because it was the only way to stay close to you. I just wanted to see you grow, to see you build your life, even from afar. Her voice was filled with sorrow and deep regret. Jeffrey, barely holding back tears, felt his heart breaking as he understood everything this woman had endured for his sake. I watched over you, even though I couldn't speak to you. It gave me the strength to keep going, she continued. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were resolute. I always believed that one day you would understand why I did this, that you would forgive me. Jeffrey couldn't hold back any longer. He stepped closer, took her hands, hands that were as warm as those he vaguely remembered from childhood, and squeezed them tightly. For the first time, he realized that these hands were those of his real mother, the woman who had loved him all his life but had never had the right to be with him. You don't have to ask for my forgiveness, he whispered, his voice shaking. You are my mother. Nothing will ever change that. I will do everything I can to make up for the years we lost. Silence fell between them, but it was a silence filled with understanding and a forgiveness that seemed to heal the wounds of the past. Jeffrey was ready to accept this woman as his mother. He could feel the love overflowing from her, despite all the obstacles. The old woman, crying with happiness and relief, looked at him with gratitude and tenderness, carrying all those years of separation in her heart. She knew that now, at last, their story could continue together. Determined to change their fate, Jeffrey said, You will come with me. From now on, you will be by my side, and I will do everything to fill your days with warmth and care. You are part of my family, just as it was always meant to be. The old woman, deeply moved by his words, simply nodded, unable to hold back tears of joy. She had dreamed of this moment her entire life, and now that it had finally come, she could hardly believe it was real. When Jeffrey brought the elderly woman home, he knew that explaining everything to his wife wouldn't be easy. Gently supporting his mother by the arm, they entered the house together. Hearing the noise in the hallway, his wife came to meet them. Jeffrey, who is this? She asked, looking at the old woman in surprise, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. She had heard her husband's stories about the mysterious woman, but never imagined she would end up in their home. Jeffrey took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment of truth. He looked at his wife and quietly said, This is Agnes Carson, my mother. His wife froze in shock at his words. She slowly shifted her gaze to the old woman, her face showing utter confusion. Your mother? She repeated as if struggling to comprehend what she had just heard. Jeffrey nodded and, feeling the need to explain, added, She was lost from my life many years ago. But thanks to a chance encounter, we are together again. She knows things about me that no one else does. The old woman, lowering her gaze shyly, whispered, I'm sorry. I never meant to intrude on your lives. Fate just brought us back together. His wife sighed, her face softening. What once seemed like an unbelievable fantasy was now becoming a reality. I don't even know what to say, she admitted, still a bit overwhelmed. This is so unexpected. We weren't prepared for a guest, especially one like this. Jeffrey smiled gently, understanding her hesitation, and reassured her, I know it's sudden, but please believe me, this means the world to me. She is a part of my past, and I want her to be here. His wife nodded, realizing that arguing would be pointless. She looked at the old woman, warmth slowly appearing in her eyes, and said, Agnes Carson, welcome to our home. We'll do everything we can to make you comfortable here. The elderly woman seemed taken aback by such kindness. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she gave a small, grateful smile. placing her hands over her heart. Thank you, I'm truly touched. I know it's a lot to ask to accept me into your lives, and I will be forever grateful for every day I get to spend here. His wife glanced at Jeffrey and he could see acceptance in her eyes. Her voice was sincere, with no trace of her earlier skepticism. In our family, there are no outsiders, she said firmly. If Jeffrey sees you as family, then that's what you are. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Jeffrey pulled his wife into an embrace. At that moment, he knew his family was finally complete, and he was ready to do everything possible to make sure his mother felt at home. Years passed. The old woman, now frail and ill, found peace in Jeffrey's home, surrounded by his care and the closeness she had been denied for so long. She felt true happiness, knowing that her son was by her side and that the bond they had rediscovered would never be broken again. When the time came for her to leave this world, Jeffrey was devastated. Yet at the same time, he felt immense gratitude for the chance to have known his real mother. Every time he visited her grave, he could feel her love and care come alive in his heart. He knew that the lessons she taught him about love, strength, and forgiveness would stay with him forever. This experience showed him that true love exists beyond time and distance. Those we love never truly leave us. They live on in our hearts, in our stories, and in the lessons we pass on. The warm memory of the two mothers who had given him life and love became his guiding star, always lighting his way. Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Let us know what you think about it in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends and loved ones. It truly motivates us to keep creating new stories every day. Don't miss the next incredible story coming up on your screen. We truly appreciate having you with us. You can find the full catalog of stories in the description below. See you soon.